Have you ever felt like your life is paralyzed, that you've lost your purpose, that everything around you is in ruins and you no longer have the strength to rebuild? Today, we are going to find out Haggai, the prophet who awakened a demotivated people, a biblical story that will touch your heart in ways you can't imagine. Haggai was not a famous prophet. He had no status. He didn't perform spectacular miracles. But he did something few have managed to do: awaken an entire nation paralyzed by fear, pain, and spiritual discouragement. This minor prophet delivered such a powerful message that he transformed rubble into hope, apathy into courage, and silence into praise. And the most impressive thing, all of this happened in just 4 months. But there's something you need to discover. Something that Haggai revealed in the book of Haggai that will completely change the way you see your own challenges. And I'm going to save that for the end of this video. Prepare your heart, because this is not just the story of Haggai. This is the story of how God uses ordinary people to do extraordinary things. Shall we begin? Jerusalem was unrecognizable. After 70 years of Babylonian exile, the people of Judah finally returned home. But what they found was not the glorious city their fathers had described. It was gray, broken stones, crumbling walls. And in the center of it all, where the majestic Temple of Solomon once stood, there was only rubble. The silence was deafening. There were no chants, no celebrations, only the sound of the wind passing through the ruins. The disheartened people walked the streets like ghosts of a faith they were no longer sure still existed. They returned full of dreams. They thought God would bring them back to rebuild the glory of Israel. But the reality was brutal. Extreme poverty, hostile neighbors, and a paralyzing fear that everything would crumble again. So they did what weary people do. They gave up dreaming. Each one took care of their own life. They built their houses. They planted their crops. But the temple, the place where God dwelt, it was forgotten, abandoned, as if God too had been left behind in exile. And it was precisely in this suffocating silence, in this spiritual darkness, that God decided to send someone no one expected. In the 2nd year of King Darius, in the 6th month, on the 1st day of the month, something happened. The word of the Lord came, and it came through a man named Haggai, a name that means festive, ironic, considering there was nothing to celebrate. Haggai was not a well-known prophet. He had no impressive genealogy. He was not part of the priestly elite. He was just a man with a message. Imagine the scene, the Jerusalem marketplace, bustling but lifeless. People buying, selling, talking about failed harvests and heavy taxes. Suddenly, an elderly man stands up. His eyes shine with an intensity that few recognize. It is the fire of God's presence. Haggai walks through the dusty streets. His clothes are simple, his face marked by time. But there is something about him that makes people stop. It is not his appearance. It is the authority he carries, an authority that does not come from social position, but from intimacy with the eternal. He doesn't shout, he doesn't need to. His mere presence breaks the apathy. People begin to gather, curious. Who is this man? What does he want? And then he opens his mouth, and what comes out are not human words. It is the voice of God himself, echoing through a chosen vessel. The prophets of the Old Testament came in times of crisis, and Haggai was no exception. But what he was about to say would change everything. This is what the Lord Almighty says. These people say, "It is not yet time to rebuild the Lord's house." Haggai's words cut through the air like a sharp blade. The silence that followed was different from the previous one. It was no longer the silence of apathy. It was the silence of someone who had just been confronted with a painful truth. But Haggai did not stop there. Haggai's message was surgical, going straight to the heart of the matter. Is it a time for you yourselves to be living in luxurious houses while this house remains a ruin? There it was, the stark reality. The people had returned from exile with promises of reconstruction, but 16 years had passed and the temple remained destroyed. They had built their own houses. Some even embellished them with cedar paneling. But the house of God, abandoned. "Consider your ways," Haggai commanded, and then came the revelation that no one wanted to hear. "You have planted much, but harvested little. You eat, but you're not satisfied. You drink, but you are not quenched. You clothe yourselves, but no one is warm. And he who earns wages puts them into a bag with holes." It was the perfect description of their lives: work without results, effort without reward. And for the first time, someone was saying why. It wasn't bad luck, it wasn't the circumstances, it was spiritual neglect. Haggai's prophetic word did not offer cheap comfort. It offered truth, and truth, however painful, is the first step toward liberation. How would you react if God challenged your priorities today? To understand the spiritual discouragement of those people, you need to understand the pain they carried. 70 years earlier, they had witnessed the impossible. Solomon's temple, that magnificent gold-covered structure where God's glory was manifested, was completely destroyed by the Babylonians. The place where their ancestors worshipped, where sacrifices were offered, where God's presence dwelt, had turned to dust, and they were taken captive, chained, dragged to a foreign land, separated from their families, forced to serve the same pagan gods who had destroyed their nation. The trauma was profound, real, undeniable. When they finally returned, full of hope, they tried to rebuild. At first, there was enthusiasm. They laid the foundations of the new temple. There was celebration. But soon opposition arose. The neighbors began to threaten. The Persian government ordered the work to stop, and the people, already weary, simply gave up. 16 years passed. Every day they looked at those ruins. The message was clear: you are not capable. You will never be what you were. And they believed that lie. They accepted defeat. They resigned themselves to a life without the manifest presence of God. Before we continue, if you've been touched by this story, please like and subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications so you don't miss future videos. This greatly helps us continue bringing you biblical stories that transform lives. But here's the truth they forgot: God never gives up. Even when we give up on ourselves, He continues working. And Haggai was there to remind them of that. The reconstruction of the temple wasn't just about bricks and wood. It was about restoring the identity of a people. It was about reminding them that they belonged to God, that their story wasn't over. And now, through Haggai, God was about to do something that seemed impossible: transform hearts of stone into hearts of flesh. After exposing the wound, Haggai brought the remedy. "Go up to the mountain," commanded the prophet Haggai. "Bring wood and rebuild the temple. Then I will take pleasure in it and be glorified, says the Lord." It wasn't a suggestion. It was a call from God for reconstruction. Direct, clear, no beating around the bush. God was calling His people back to their original purpose. But this call demanded something they had lost: courage. Think about it. Climbing the mountain meant leaving their comfort zone. Gathering wood meant spending resources they barely had. Rebuilding meant facing enemy opposition again. And all this without any human guarantee of success. But there was a promise that changed everything. "Then I will take pleasure in him and be glorified." God wasn't asking for perfection. He wasn't demanding that the new temple be as glorious as Solomon's. He was asking for obedience, availability, faith. And something extraordinary happened. The Bible records that the Lord stirred up the spirit of the leaders and the people. It wasn't a purely human decision. It was a biblical spiritual awakening. God touched something deep within them. He rekindled a flame that seemed extinguished forever. Suddenly, the impossible became possible. Fear gave way to determination. Apathy was replaced by passion. And 23 days after Haggai's first message, the people began to work on the house of the Lord Almighty. 23 days. That's all God needed to transform a demotivated people into a nation of builders. How long does God need to transform your life? Every great work needs courageous leaders. And God had already prepared them. Zerubbabel, governor of Judah, was a direct descendant of King David. He carried the blood of royalty in his veins. but his crown was invisible. His throne was a broken people. His inheritance was a pile of rubble. Yet, when Haggai spoke, Zerubbabel listened, and more than listened, he acted. Beside him stood Joshua, the high priest. Together, these two leaders represented government and altar, authority and worship. And when they stood to obey, the people followed them. But the real secret of their leadership wasn't in their abilities. It was in their partnership with Haggai. The prophet Haggai didn't build walls, he didn't carry stones, but he did something far more important. He kept God's purpose in the reconstruction alive. While Zerubbabel organized the teams and planned the logistics, Haggai prophesied. While Joshua led the rituals and prayers, Haggai reminded the people of the reason for it all. He was the constant voice of God, the compass that kept everyone pointing in the right direction. This partnership between political leader, spiritual leader, and prophet was powerful. Zerubbabel brought the strategy, Joshua brought the consecration, Haggai brought the word, and together they formed the tripod that would support the entire work. The story of Haggai teaches us something crucial. Leadership isn't about doing everything alone. It's about listening to God's voice and mobilizing people for a purpose greater than themselves. And when leaders submit to God, even the impossible becomes inevitable. The reconstruction of the temple began on the 24th day of the 6th month. It was an ordinary day, but it would become historic, because on that day, something that was dead came back to life. The faith of a nation was resurrected. The people of Judah awoke. Imagine the scene. Hundreds of people climbing the mountain, cutting down trees, carrying enormous logs, arranging stones, preparing mortar. Each hammer blow was a declaration of war against discouragement. Each stone placed was an act of faith. They didn't have abundant resources, they didn't have advanced technology, but they had something more powerful. They had purpose, and when people awaken to their purpose, mountains move. This biblical spiritual awakening did not happen by chance. It was a direct result of the prophetic word. Haggai had confronted, called, and now accompanied them. His constant presence reminded the people that they were not alone. God was with them. And for the first time in years, Jerusalem had sounded again, the sound of reconstruction, the sound of a people who decided not to accept defeat anymore, the sound of the spiritual motivation in the Bible becoming a concrete reality. But if you think it would be easy from here on out, you're mistaken, because every work of God faces resistance, and the greatest of these was about to appear. A month later, the initial excitement began to give way to doubt. Their hands were still working, but their hearts began to weigh heavily, because the resistance didn't just come from the outside, it came from within. And that's always the most dangerous kind. The enemies around watched with disdain. They mocked the work. Do you think you can rebuild this? Do you think this temple will amount to anything? The words were like poisoned arrows, striking exactly where it hurt. Even worse, resources were scarce. Each day of work meant a day without tending to their own crops. Families were making real sacrifices, and when sacrifices accumulate without immediate visible results, the temptation to give up becomes almost irresistible. But there was something even deeper. The elders, those who had seen Solomon's temple in its glory, looked at the current building and wept, because it didn't compare. It was smaller, simpler, less glorious, and the comparison killed the joy. "What's the point?" some whispered. "It will never be the same." And that voice, that cruel comparison between what was and what is, paralyzed many. The demotivated people were returning. The old shadow threatened to swallow the new beginning. Zerubbabel saw doubt in people's eyes. Joshua felt the weight of discouragement during prayer, and everyone wondered, is it worth continuing? It was then that Haggai received a new message, and this would be the most important of all. In the 7th month, on the 21st day, the word of the Lord came again through Haggai. The prophet gathered the people. They were all tired, covered in dust, with calloused hands. And he began with a question that everyone was thinking, but no one dared to ask. Who among you saw this house in its former glory? And how do you see it now? Is it not as nothing in your eyes? Silence, because it was true, painfully true. But then came the turning point. Haggai's message that would change everything. But now, be strong, Zerubbabel. Be strong, Joshua. Be strong, all you people of the land, and work, for I am with you, declares the Lord Almighty. I am with you. 4 words that contained all the power of the universe. The size of the temple didn't matter. The opinion of the enemies didn't matter. It didn't matter if it seemed less glorious than the previous one, because God was present. And where God is, there is glory. Haggai continued, and what he said was almost impossible to believe. The glory of this latter house shall be greater than that of the former, says the Lord of hosts, and in this place I will give peace. Wait, how could it be bigger? The temple was visibly smaller. How could it be more glorious? And that's when the people understood. Glory isn't measured in gold and cedar. Glory is measured in presence. And God was promising that his presence would be there in an even more powerful way. More than that, Haggai revealed something prophetic. This temple they were building would be the temple where, centuries later, Jesus Christ, God himself in the flesh, would walk. It would be the place where the Messiah would teach, where he would drive out the merchants, where he would declare, "Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up." The glory of God's physical presence would surpass any amount of gold in Solomon's temple. And at that moment, the book of Haggai records something supernatural. Revival in the Old Testament happened, not with fire from heaven, not with spectacular miracles, but with something much deeper: inner renewal, faith restored, hope rekindled. They weren't just rebuilding walls, they were rebuilding their identity as God's people. 4 years later, in the 6th year of King Darius, on the 3rd day of the month of Adar, the temple was completed. It wasn't quick, it wasn't easy, but it was done. Each stone laid was a victory against discouragement. Each beam erected was a testament to faith. And when the last piece was put in place, something extraordinary happened. The people celebrated, they wept, they worshipped. Because this was not just a building, it was proof that God fulfills his promises. It was a symbol of the restoration of Jerusalem. It was evidence that even the most discouraged can accomplish the impossible when God is with them. Zerubbabel, now older, gazed at the building with tears in his eyes. He had begun as governor of a broken people. He was ending as leader of a restored nation. Joshua, the high priest, prepared to consecrate the temple, knowing that there, once again, the name of the Lord would dwell. And Haggai, the minor prophet who shook an entire nation, he had fulfilled his purpose. His words, recorded in the small book of Haggai of only 2 chapters, had generated a transformation that would echo for centuries. The rebuilding of the temple wasn't just about architecture, it was about redemption. It was about proving that God does not abandon his people. It was about demonstrating that obedience, even when it seems impossible, always leads to victory. And God's purpose in the reconstruction went far beyond what they could have imagined, because that temple would become the setting for something that would change the entire history of humanity. But you need to understand this within the full context of Haggai's journey. Haggai prophesied for only 4 months. 4 months, 16 weeks, approximately 120 days. And in that short period, he delivered 4 messages that transformed an entire generation. There is no record of spectacular miracles performed by Haggai. He did not part seas. He did not make fire descend from heaven. He did not raise the dead. But he did something equally powerful. He awakened consciences. He revived purpose. He restored identity. The story of Haggai teaches us that you don't need to be famous to be used by God. You don't need unlimited resources. You don't need a huge platform. You just need to be available, willing, obedient. Haggai was an ordinary man with an extraordinary message, and that made all the difference, because in the end, It's not about who you are, it's about who is with you. Today, centuries later, this motivational biblical story continues to resonate. Every time someone feels discouraged and decides to get up. Every time a dream seems impossible but someone decides to try. Every time faith seems dead but someone decides to believe again. There is the spirit of Haggai. The prophet no one expected became the prophet no one forgets, and his message is clear. It doesn't matter how destroyed your life seems to be. It doesn't matter how much time you've wasted. It doesn't matter how many times you've given up. God keeps saying, I am with you. And if God is with you, you can rebuild, you can start over, you can achieve the impossible. Haggai, as Haggai is known in English, means festive. And now we understand why. Because when you obey God, even in the most difficult times, the end is always a celebration. The question now is, what is God calling you to rebuild? We have reached the end of this powerful journey through the life of Haggai, the prophet who awakened a demotivated people. And now I want you to reflect with me. How many times are you living in your luxurious home while the temple of your spiritual life is in ruins? How many times have you placed your personal priorities above God's calling? Haggai teaches us that it's never too late to start over. It's never too late to answer God's call. It doesn't matter how much time you've lost. It doesn't matter how great the destruction seems. When God says, I am with you, mountains move. Perhaps you are going through your own exile. Perhaps your faith is in ruins. Perhaps you have given up dreaming about the purpose God has for you. But today, through the story of Haggai, God is speaking to you. Get up, go up the mountain, start building again. I want you to do something now. In the comments, write, today I decide to rebuild. Declare it, because when you declare it, you activate your faith. And when you activate your faith, God moves. If this video touched your heart, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next Bible stories that will transform your life. Leave a like and share it with someone who needs to hear this message of hope and restoration. Remember, you are not alone on this journey. Just as God was with Haggai, with Zerubbabel, with Joshua, and with all the people of Judah, He is with you now. The promise remains the same. I am with you, declares the Lord Almighty. And when God is with you, there is no ruined temple that cannot be rebuilt. There is no destroyed dream that cannot be resurrected. There is no paralyzed life that cannot walk again. Its reconstruction begins today. Its story is not over. The best is yet to come. May the God of Haggai, the God who awakens entire nations, awaken you to the eternal purpose He has prepared. Until the next video, and remember, you were created to make history. Don't give up.